I would prefer this personally than living on the street.
It's about the same, really.
It's really about the same because we would have more freedom out there, though.
We wouldn't care if we lost it today.
That is a clip from a viral video originally posted to Instagram that has been making the rounds on X, formerly known as Twitter, of a couple of homeless people in Knoxville, Tennessee, who were given public housing, the housing first approach, and all they do throughout the course of the video is talk down on the housing and talk about how they don't like it, it's not good enough, and they would prefer to be given a home or something bigger with nicer windows, a yard in order to do work, and they genuinely feel with the restrictions that are placed on public housing like this in places like Nashville that they're better off on the street, which I think is a very important lesson about homeless people that a lot of people, specifically on the left side of the political spectrum, don't seem to understand. The problem isn't the fact that they're the homeless. The problem is the people portion of it. They are human beings. They have wants and desires, and they make choices that have led them to be homeless. Homelessness is actually a symptom, oftentimes, of other problems in these people's lives, and this is one of the reasons why, despite what you hear from the left time and time again, housing first policies don't actually work. Now, I remember Bill Maher recently did a segment, or maybe it was a year ago, I don't really know, where he talked about how the state of California was spending over $1 million on one-bedroom apartments, at least $800,000, but close to $1 million on one-bedroom apartments per unit, by the way. And he suggested instead of these bloated, ridiculous projects, that what the state of California should actually do is buy Quonset huts for about $8,000 to $12,000, put the homeless people in there, assess them, and then determine what levels of treatment that they would need. But the reason he believed they weren't doing that is because there was too much graft, too much theft in the homeless industrial complex.
You know, after World War II, there was a huge housing shortage in L.A. when all the vets returned home and had nowhere to live. So the government found some empty space and in a matter of months built Quonset huts for 6,000 people, all for a total cost of what in today's dollars would be less than $18 million. Well, that was then. In the bond measure we passed in 2016 to build housing for the homeless, each unit was projected to cost $140,000, which is more than the asking price for this 4-bedroom Dutch colonial in Little Falls, New York. And now that we're actually building these apartments, the cost for each unit has risen to $531K. How is that possible, you may ask? Do they each come with a Lambo and a Shark Tank? Of course, they still make those Quonset huts, and one today would cost about $8,000. But it's hard to skim money off $8,000. But $531,000, sure. About 40% of that cost goes to something the city calls soft costs,
which ultimately ends up preventing something like that from happening. But in reality, even if you were to build the cheaper option, what we see in this particular video is that some percentage of the homelessness would hate it, they would choose to live on the streets, and they would be wildly ungrateful about the opportunities that you're offering them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
I don't want to be in government housing. This is Isabella Towers, an apartment complex in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's just terrible.
And it's just too small.
Now look, I want to take note of two different things about this particular video for everybody out there in the audience. First and foremost, these are white people. I just want to put that out there that I am criticizing white people for those of you who believe that I am obsessed with only criticizing black people. If you perform terribly, if you are indicative of a broader problem, I'm going to highlight you regardless of race because my issue is policy and policy that should be changed. And in reality, we have a lot of misperceptions around homeless people, around the policy on how to address it, and this is a perfect example of that. And it's just that they don't factor in the human element, that these people would be so ungrateful, that these people would think that the apartment, which could be pretty nice for them, is actually too small. Now, to be perfectly fair, the building that they're in looks ugly. The walls in the building look absolutely terrible. They have those yellow painted bricks. It honestly looks like a hospital, so I can understand why, if you had choices, you would choose not to live there given the option. But the fact of the matter is, these people theoretically don't have choices. These people are living on the streets as the alternative. However, when given this opportunity in order to build themselves up and then possibly move on to greater pastures in the future, they end up rejecting that choice. They end up, again, trashing the place. And by the way, the reason why they have those brick walls in that particular building is because these people tend to do a ridiculous amount of damage to these apartments. So they try to make everything as basically indestructible as you possibly can. And that's what we're seeing right here and them reacting to. And again, I will remind you that in the state of California, they are currently building apartment complexes to the tune of over $800,000 to $1 million per unit that people will regard with similar disdain and destroy in similar ways. It's absolutely horrible. It's disgusting. And obviously it brings up some level of vitriol towards these people. But I need you guys to understand that a lot of these people are suffering from mental illnesses. They are suffering from addiction. So the reason why they're reacting this poorly and they're talking about how there are restrictions on their freedom is possibly those restrictions have to do with drug usage and or alcoholism. But to be clear, I cannot say that for 100% certainty with these two individuals.
But you could kind of make this nice, about the size of mine back home now. Come on, we gotta learn a little gratitude. This is a heater. I would prefer this personally than living on the street.
It's about the same, really.
It's really about the same because we would have more freedom out there, though.
We wouldn't care if we lost it today, though.
You wouldn't care?
Nah.
Got
That's
the TV,
the only
AC, shower,
The only two things
locked door.
Yeah. We consider this still homeless.
I still...
Now again, this guy brings up all the different things that these people have. They have TV, air conditioner, refrigeration, they have heat, all the essentials that you would think these people would need in order to get their lives together. And they say this is still on the same level of homelessness. They are not about it, and nothing that you're going to say is going to convince them that they should be about it. And this reminds me of that poverty experiment that I think NYU tried to do in Africa, where they wanted to lift people, I believe in Uganda, out of poverty, and they basically said that they would be able to do this for the low cost of $500 per person. So they decided that they were going to have them grow corn, so that way they could have very nutritious food, because it was easy to grow and very dense in calories. And they basically worked out all this stuff in order for them to be able to be a sufficient community, lift themselves out of poverty, and ultimately it ended up turning out to be a disaster. And the reason it turned out to be a disaster was because of the human element, because it turned out those particular Africans, I believe they were Ugandans, didn't like corn. They viewed corn as prison food in their particular culture. So even though they grew a surplus of this particular crop, because corn is incredibly easy to grow, the people refused to eat it. So then the people at this university decided, okay, well, if you're not going to eat it, you're going to have to sell the corn. So then they decided to build out infrastructure in order to help them bring the corn to market, in order for the corn to be sold, in order for them to make money, in order for them to buy the food that they wanted. Now, of course, this required them building a road. This, of course, required them having some way of storing it for transportation, needed them to be able to get out of the country in order to sell it to people that actually did enjoy eating corn. And then you have to compete on the global corn market. And needless to say, long story short, it ended up costing these people who were going to bring these Ugandans out of poverty for $500 per person about $12,000 in order to achieve the goal that they set out, because they kept running into barrier after barrier, and the overwhelming majority of those barriers were because of the human element. And by the way, you might not think that $12,000 sounds like a lot, but $12,000 is the American poverty rate. $12,000 is in and around the GDP per capita of Russia and China, countries that you don't typically think of as poverty-stricken countries, and well beyond the estimated cost of about $500 per person. And it was all because the people in that particular area were not compliant. They did not behave the way that people expected. And this is something that we have to take into account when we're crafting policy. Now, again, listen to them complain more about the public housing.
I want to live in a house
To where I could actually go outside and do yard work.
Achieving that from this place is substantially easier than achieving that from the streets.
Not really. It's much easier to do on the streets.
It doesn't have a window factor.
But I would say this is a good transitionary point. Have a place where you can take a shower, freshen up, and then go to work, start saving money, open up a bank account. It has a lot of potential. And then from there you can eventually have your first lasting security for a place that you actually
that we actually want.
Now again, I don't know what's going on with these people's mental situation, with their addiction situation, or anything of the sort, but I totally understand the anger that a lot of people direct towards them because they come off as incredibly ungrateful and completely disconnected from reality. But the thing is, this is who you're actually dealing with. This is who you're actually engaging with when you're talking about homeless people. A lot of people think that homeless people just can't afford the escalating rents because of the evil, racist, or terrible in some other way landlords that are trying to deprive them over housing because of capitalism or something of the sort. But in reality, a huge portion of homeless people choose to live on the streets. They are enabled by a bunch of different government programs, and if given the alternative, if given the choice to have public housing, they would react very similarly to these people, where they would not be grateful for it, they would not want it, they would still see it as being homeless, they would see it as worse in a bunch of different ways, and they would trash the location that they are given at the behest of the taxpayer. This is the reality of this situation, and a lot of lefties really embrace this idea of housing first. That's the way that you solve homelessness, and essentially it has created this ideology, a paralysis in actually addressing the issues that these people have, because what ends up happening is you take forever in these left-wing places to build the housing. It costs exorbitant amounts of money, like in California, again, $800,000 per unit, per one-bedroom apartment to build in the state of California. And in addition to that, while that's going on, you're enabling all their other problems because supposedly you think they're going to be magically fixed once they get into housing. And by the way, a lot of this is based on a successful program in the city of New York, which worked largely due to the fact that it was located in the city of New York. So it was actually pretty easy to consolidate the people and consolidate the social workers, the psychiatrists, and all those other addiction specialists within the same building in order to aid the different various issues that these people had. And this is the example that all these different various lefties will cite time and time again, when in reality, when housing first plays out over a longer period of time and it's attempted to be replicated in other places, the results are absolutely disastrous. And yeah, while initially when you give people housing, when you direct them into shelters, what ultimately ends up happening is that you get a reduction in homelessness. It turns out that long term, when you actually re-examine these particular people, the results are absolutely devastating. Now, I would like to tell you that 50% of the people in this Boston survey from their Housing First program ended up back on the streets. And the reason why I would like to tell you that is because it's actually significantly worse than that, because 50% of the participants that they ended up checking up on years later actually ended up dead. They died. They were given the housing first, the thing that was supposed to solve all their problems. It was treated as if them being homeless was their primary problem. And years later, half of them died. They were gone. Not to mention all the other different people that ended up back on the streets because this program wasn't effective. But again, 50% of them died because they weren't addressing their major issues, their underlying issues that caused them to be homeless. Now look, as crazy as it sounds, you might be able to make the case that 50% fatality rate among the homeless population in conjunction with this government program is actually better than they would have been had they been on the streets, because that population is so vulnerable based on violence, based on mental health issues, based on overall poor health issues, based on drug addiction and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, they have not yet been able to replicate the results of the New York program for any extended period of time. And even the New York program was a limited program. So it's not like they've been able to expand that out in the city of New York to make it more broadly applicable. Look, I'm somebody who said on this channel that I actually agree with Bill Maher's idea. If you're going to give these people housing, don't spend $800,000 on a single one-bedroom apartment per apartment in a bloated, ridiculous project that takes years and years and years in order to complete. Give these people the Quonset huts, the same exact thing that we gave returning World War II veterans when they came back to the country and there was a housing shortage. But the fact of the matter is, a bunch of these people would choose not to go to that housing. And this population is not the greatest generation returning from fighting a war, who are largely not only fine, but they were upstanding citizens in the United States of America who returned from fighting to our country and were just going to be able to be stationed there with their families for a temporary period of time before they got out. This population has a much greater risk. They actually, in a lot of cases, like living on the streets. And the fact of the matter is, there isn't a real good way for us to determine who is just a helping hand away from getting back into normal society and who's absolutely addicted to not only drugs or not only suffering from mental illnesses, but addicted to living on the street. Look, I understand a lot of people look at the video of those two individuals complaining about each and everything, and they get angry at them. They get frustrated with them. But the fact of the matter is, they did us a public service. For far too long, the liberal elites, the liberal intelligentsia, have told us that homeless people are victims of our society. They have no choice in the matter, and we just need to buck capitalism, build them housing, and that will solve all their problems, when that is just not the case. Again, there's a reason why they want to change the name from homeless people to unhoused. And by the way, a lot of you pointed out that they were originally called vagrants, and yes, this is much more accurate as a descriptor than unhoused people in order to describe them, because guess what? It's the attitude, it's the people that's the problem, not the homelessness. Again, you have to treat the symptoms, the underlying issue with them as people, not just give them homes, because guess what? They won't even care about it, they won't even take care of it, and they'll tell you to your face that they prefer to live on the street. Now, with all that being said, I want to leave this off to you guys out there in the audience. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Do you understand the angle that I'm trying to explain to you? Do you understand what these people actually teach us? Or did you not get beyond the first 10 seconds of this video where they were complaining, deciding that you were angry at them, and deciding that they are deserving of some kind of pain, some kind of retribution from the taxpayers? Because I definitely do understand that sentiment, and if you feel that way, let me know down in the comments below. Now, as per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about homeless people hating on public housing, hating on free housing. Till next time.